Hi everyone. We are welcoming today to Emerging Proud Marie Grace Brook. Lovely to be with you, Marie. See your lovely Californian garden there behind you. Marie, you started your professional career off as a social worker, and you're now a certified spiritual director. You've served on the board for ASSIST, the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences. And you're currently doing your PhD research into the integration of spiritually transformative experiences, working with Dr. David Lukoff. Is that right? Welcome to Emerging Proud. Really, really grateful that you're here with us. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Would you mind if we start with everybody? I normally just ask them to share a little bit about their personal journey. If you don't mind just giving people, I know you've had a really long, profound, because we know each other personally too, which is lovely. So I know quite a bit about your personal story, but if you don't mind sharing a bit with people about how it all started for you and your journey to kind of integration and what led you to be so passionate about what you do now, that would be great.
Thank you. Just give me an idea of time so I have an idea. Are we talking 5 minutes?
Whatever feels really appropriate to share. I kind of always ask for the information that people need to hear to be shared.
Okay, so I'll start out small, and then you can just ask more questions if you want.
Whatever resonates with you and your work, really. Whatever you've found to be helpful for people to hear who are going through the process.
Okay. Well, I think I already sent you a summary that happened when I was 25 from meditation. I had been inspired to follow a book's instructions how to meditate because I thought, ooh, enlightenment sounds like something I'd like to have this lifetime. And I was very rigorous about my meditation. I took it very seriously, alone, with nobody else and no teacher. And after 6 months, I began to have a psychic opening and spiritual experiences that were way beyond what I could even imagine or comprehend. I've been brought up in a non-spiritual home by scientists. So it was a great challenge to realize or begin to realize that there was a reality more real than this one on Earth, more real than our materialistic plane. And kind of fascination turned into eventually intimidation. And a lot of psychic experiences like telepathy and understanding that I realized something was going to happen in the future, seeing through people's bodies, synchronicity, kind of persistent synchronicity, very intimidating. On the other hand, the bliss and the rapture was so beautiful. I wanted more of it. Mm-hmm. And eventually I felt like I was going crazy. At the time I was out of the country, I came back into the country just to seek shelter because I did not want to end up in a mental institute in a foreign country. And dropped out of pre-med. I was in a pre-med program, and then decided that whatever was going on, nobody in my close circles had any idea, but I knew that I did not want to end up in a mental institution. So I found a cabin in the mountains and said, I'm going to give myself 4 seasons to just integrate this, to just be quiet and listen to my inner knowing.
Wow.
And after 12 months, I should be fine and then be able to go out and tell the world about this.
We're having some interference with the microphone.
Okay. Sorry, I think I'll just try to hold it a little bit. Here we go. Is this better?
Yeah, thank you.
Instead of all my hand motions pushing my microphone around.
I didn't want to miss what you were saying.
All right.
Was that intuitive, Marie?
What I said was that I figured a year should do it, and then I can go back into the world and tell people about it because it was so magnificent. So I spent 4 seasons. I moved in September into the mountains, high Rockies in Colorado, in a tiny cabin. And when I really relaxed and just focused on meditating, my body shook. It just shook all the time. Anytime I got relaxed, anytime I fell asleep, I woke up with screaming nightmares. I was just exhausted. But I just let it happen. And I just focused on what the spiritual books that I brought with me said, which was let go, let God, allow it, submit, surrender. That's all I did for that year. And I thought, oh, I'll surrender enough finally that I'll, it'll empty out, was the sense I got. So that next August, after 12 months, I was not integrated, but I ran out of money. So I came down off the mountain and started trying to figure out how in the world I was going to make a living when I really could not function in this worldly reality very well.
Yeah.
Which brought me to a healing arts school, and massage worked well because I could give a massage and then rest for an hour, kind of recover from the intensity of the healing, both with that person and with me. And also I found that people came to me a lot. I seemed to have a touch for healing. About 4 years later, I felt pretty solid, and I really wanted to have a family and get married, so I did. And I kind of had this arrangement. I talked with God a lot. I said, I don't think I'm ready, because I think that I found that people projected things on me. They felt like I had very special healing powers, spiritual powers. They wanted to be in my presence. And I could tell that in my rudimentary understanding of what was going on, that my ego would very quickly start to think I was something special. And I just had this instinct. It was like, I'm not ready. I'm not mature enough for this. I would rather hide out and be like a normal person until I don't feel like my ego would get carried away with this.
Wow.
And that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. It took decades.
Wow. I mean, the things you just shared, Marie, are so, so important, aren't they? Because it's like you just described, a really common precipitator of this awakening is intense meditation. And that's what a lot of people, presumably, does your research find that that's a common precipitator for people too?
Yes. Very common.
Yeah. And then feeling like you can't fit into society, and how are you going to integrate and make a living? And it's amazing that you were able to kind of keep that witness stance throughout it all, and kind of be aware of, because the ego thing is big, isn't it? It's like, we all feel like when we first wake up, it's like, oh, I'm the only person in the world and I've got a message, and then kind of realizing, actually, no, I'm not. There's thousands and thousands of other people around the world, and saints and mystics of thousands of years have been going through this. So gosh, that's amazing that you had the resolve to kind of realize that that's what you needed to do. Do you think that's related? Would you say, is there anything that you found in your research to say why that is? Why you were able to keep that, to not kind of get drawn really into the messiness of the experience, and you were able to kind of hold that witness?
Essentially what we're talking about in research in this field we call spiritual bypass. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And of course I had no idea what that was back then. I only discovered that word a few years ago, that spiritual bypass is when the power of the spiritual experience, which is so close to the divine, makes us believe that we're more spiritually developed than we are. And so we bypass the hard work of cleansing and grounding. And the cleansing and grounding is, where the ego has to mature and eventually let go of the reins. so that's a big process, you know, and a lot of, and if we don't even have a lot of, you know, whatever. And as far as my research, what I did when I put out my survey, which everyone who took my survey noticed this, I didn't really talk about it, but first there's just the demographics, tell me about yourself, you know, answer the questions about yourself and about your spiritual experience, transformative experience. In the middle part of the survey was actually 2 tests. What I wanted to do is I wanted to test to see if the people who took the survey had integrated their spiritual experience, so that I could allow people who maybe hadn't integrated it yet, not use their information, not use their input, or people who maybe were on spiritual bypass, not use their input. Because then the input I ended up with, which was, you know, a little over half of all the people that responded to the survey, I wanted the input of their opinion about how they integrated their spiritual experience to be have that level of maturation. Mm-hmm. Like I've been through enough of the experience that I'm steady at least in the world, which is what I call adjusting, and then ideally I've integrated into my, you know, psycho-spiritual inner identity, and those go hand in hand. Usually adjustment in society happens first because we kind of have to for survival reasons, and then the integration of our spiritual psychology kind of follows along, trails that. So those 2 tests that I did, one of them was a mental health questionnaire to see if someone felt happy in their life and mentally healthy in terms of fitting into society. It was just kind of a standard mental health questionnaire. And the other one was it's actually a different subject. It was the post-traumatic growth inventory to see if really what they'd gone through was truly a transformative experience, and if they had spiritual growth from it, not just psychological growth. So let me go back to the mental health one. So the mental health questionnaire, I also asked them if they had integrated it, but I didn't totally rely on whether they said they integrated it. I thought, first of all, if they pass the mental health questionnaire, which means that they're not anxious, they're not depressed, they feel happy, they feel grounded in their lives, then I trusted the test. But it did turn out that it was statistically significant that people who rated themselves as having integrated it did match having passed that test. But there were many people, maybe half, who said, almost half, who said that they hadn't integrated yet they passed the test. I went ahead and took these people because that was my spiritual bypass thing. It's like, you know, if you're humble enough to realize that integration is not something you just reach, then you may consider yourself as not having integrated it because it is such a long process. You know, I wanted to include that group of people who hadn't maybe just go, well, I'm not really there yet. Well, yeah, it makes sense you're not there. But if you have the humility to realize that that's also a sign of mental health.
I was wondering that. I was wondering that as you were talking, actually, Marie, because I would say I'm certainly still in integration process, and I think this project is part of my integration. But I kind of see it as a lifelong thing. I'm not sure we ever kind of get there. It's kind of like a growth until we leave this earthly plane. I don't know whether that's your view, but I certainly, I don't know. I just feel like we can always grow and learn from this and kind of human evolution until we, I don't know, ascend or whatever we do in the final life. We're having some interference again, I'm afraid. Is your
oh, I must have moved. Sorry.
I think maybe your hair's over your mic.
Yes, I should just keep my hand here and we're good. Just
we're getting all excited and animated.
I do. I get all animated.
It's great. I'm sorry. I'm just wondering as well if we could rewind a little bit. You said it took you decades to kind of really get onto your path and feel that you were kind of integrating your experience because it was so profound. were there certain things that helped you along the way, Marie? Have you got certain things that you use now maybe to kind of still help, or that you advise people when you're counseling people?
Well, I follow my inner guidance. I really advise that, especially, and I balance that with discernment. I think discernment is really important, and I think sometimes people underestimate the value of discernment. And I was thinking about this before the interview, that having had a lot of experience and worked with a lot of people who experience psychic phenomena and supernatural powers, that can be misleading because that is not necessarily spiritual. I mean, that's just psychic powers. That's just otherworldly things beyond this realm. There are a lot of realms, besides the material realm. So sometimes people think once they've kind of like popped out of this realm and had experiences that draw on other realms, or they get to go to other realms, that's spiritual. In my mind, spiritual is different than metaphysical. That's metaphysical. And spiritual is, to me, connecting with the love that created us.
Our own divinity. That's so interesting that you've mentioned this. That's really interesting, Marie, because you're just making me think, because I've been kind of confused about this, I must admit, before. And that's really a really clear way of explaining it, that somebody can have psychic phenomena and be a medium or identify as a channeler or whatever it might be, but not have experienced a spiritual awakening. Is that kind of what you're saying? Their own personal connection with their own divinity?
Right. And that's when I said I used the second test, which is actually a test taken from people who were survivors of trauma. But the point was, it measured, did they have a spiritual transformation? Because people can have a lot of awakenings. You can awaken into your psychic centers. You can awaken into the sensing the music of the spheres. We can awaken into all sorts of things that are beyond this physical world in the metaphysical realms. But to have a spiritual transformation, in my mind and my experience, is my soul transforming spiritually? And it reflects in my character. The character of this body and this identity and this ego that I live in.
Oh,
so yeah.
Okay, so it's like, yes, so okay, yeah, you're things are clicking into place for me now. This is really helpful. I'm just thinking about what we were talking about before as well, about how when that happens, so is spiritually transformed. And correct me if I'm not getting this right. If somebody has that spiritual transformation, it affects them not only kind of on a spiritual level, but also on a psychological level. So we have character growth, we have human kind of developmental growth, but also on a physical level as well. It affects us, our biochemistry. And we were talking a little bit before we started to record about how this all connects to our physicality as well. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that a bit, Marie, because I know it's really significant for you, isn't it? Hopefully you don't mind me saying about do you mind just giving people a bit of information about what's happened with your journey with your
Sure, I'll be happy to, but I'm going to go back to what you just
Sorry,
said.
okay. Yep.
Not that I would in any way correct what you said, because what you said is kind of a common way that people speak about spiritual versus psychological versus physical. But I think that's what to get back to my point about discernment. Over these decades of integrating it, I became very aware and mindful of what I called spiritual. People tend to call metaphysical spiritual. And so, when you said your character, not only do you have a change on a spiritual level, but your character develops. I don't think there is any difference between true spiritual transformation and character development and physical healing. I don't think that there's any difference between those. But what I do see a lot in the realm of spiritual emergence is people getting carried away with physical experiences that are really dramatic, but not necessarily healing. Psychological experiences that are very expansive, but not necessarily spiritually divinely directed, and metaphysical experiences also that are really out there as far as experiencing other astral realms and other realms of existence, but they're not divinely directed. And that when they're divinely directed, I think naturally there is a psychological character metamorphosis that happens, where our ego does become refined and eventually wants to submit itself to something greater than itself. And physically, there's a natural healing when we allow our whole bodies to participate in this, where healing spontaneously happens, layers of healing. So does that
yeah, I suppose I get confused about, because I've spoken to so many people, and obviously there's slightly differing opinions.
Right.
I suppose I'm kind of trying to get things clear in my own mind, and I suppose the reality is we don't know. Some of this is not absolute, is it? It's just kind of I think there's a lot of talk about when somebody has a Satori experience, an enlightenment experience, but they've had trauma in their psychological development stages, so neurologically being impacted by trauma in early childhood or whatever it is, and their emotional stability or their nervous system is affected in a way that affects their reaction to that experience. Or if their ego structure isn't quite so strong, so they haven't got that witness stance ability, that then can also affect the experience that somebody has when they have an awakening. So would you agree with that, or does that fit with what you're researching?
Well, Chris, now I'm not doing research on that particular thing, although that's a huge area of really important research, is the connection specifically between trauma and spiritual experience. Even though I did use the post-traumatic growth inventory in my survey, that's not my area of expertise. But I would say, having gone through my own experiences and seen a lot of others, that for me, a real key that I've noticed over the decades is grounding. Yeah. And my theory is that when we go through trauma, and there's extreme trauma, and then it even gets subtler. But when we go through trauma, to some extent, we close down so that we only experience as much as we can handle. That's like this God-given gift to us as humans, because it's pretty rough sometimes down here in the material world. So it's like we literally kind of isolate or numbify parts of our psyche and our body. But we're still whole. I think that we kind of go out of our bodies slightly or completely during those times. And my theory is that sometimes the other realms become more accessible to us if we've had trauma, because we've kind of, you might say, been forced out of our body to some degree. Yeah. So when we have these Satori experiences, a lot of times we're having them outside of our body. Yeah. But the whole Kundalini Hindu tradition is to prepare our bodies enough that we can have those experiences while we are still in our bodies, which is more where I've leaned in my many decades of study. And by the way, I want to say, when you said what has helped, the other thing besides discernment between spiritual and metaphysical, the other thing is I've studied with a lot of teachers. I haven't had one single guru. Maybe my closest guru would be Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
but I've had some who are living. I've studied with teachers who are living on this planet, and Kundalini, Buddhism, shamanism, and Taoism. And I have trusted myself to be drawn to certain teachers when it's right for me at that time.
Right.
And I kind of keep coming back to the anchor of the Gospels, because there is something about the Gospels and Jesus walking the earth that is an amazing anchor. I feel like that there's a spiritual purity there that speaks for itself. That's kind of why he was so popular, you might say. So the question where were we? I got a little sidetracked there.
Sorry, I've been kind of sidetracking you as well. I think
yes, you have been.
Sorry, Marie.
That's fine.
So much to talk about. There's so much to talk about, and it was really helpful the way you described about kind of when people have trauma, they're more prone to kind of leaving their body, disassociating, and that's what the neuroscientists are also saying.
Right. So I'll take that thread back. Mm-hmm. That if we think of it as we have these wonderful chances to get to know and build our soul right here in the material realm from the point of view of the body, psychologically, and then besides the learned things we know we can learn about spirituality through religions and stuff, there's the direct experience. And we can't necessarily feel them all at once, but it's a nice goal. And you talked about, like, we do this over and over again, maybe every lifetime until something. I mean, maybe there's a point where we can just experience it in our body, and and that's a beautiful thing also. Not that anything's better than anything else while we're here on this planet. It is a good place to do it all.
Absolutely. But you've just brought us back to body, and that was the thing that I wanted to come back to. So to talk about how this all relates to us in body as well, and how biologically things shift when we go through these experiences, as bizarre as some things might sound to some people. And I would love, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit personally, Marie, about
you had asked me, and you had asked me earlier if I minded talking about my teeth, since I have two missing teeth and braces. And it is an interesting story for me. Now, I've had a lot of feeling, the movement of healing in my body.
Yeah.
So that as spiritual experiences kind of change my thinking, then they change my psychological makeup, and then all of a sudden places open up in my body, channels open up, flexibility that I didn't used to have, abilities physically that I didn't used to have.
Yeah.
And at one point in my life, I was getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and my husband and I thought I was going to die. But the doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. I wasn't too worried because I'm not too concerned about dying, because I feel like I have a good sense of where I'm going. But there was like how to handle this, how to deal with this. And I did end up taking half a year and just going off and sitting in mountains and praying a lot. And as I got weaker and weaker and closer to not having any desire to live and not having enough energy to live, an occurrence happened. One is that my husband and I parted, which was okay. We parted in great love. And soon after that, I was in a healing session where I was helping someone else and all this, and I knew that they were learning healing. So I said, I'm really exhausted. Why don't you practice your healing on me? This lovely lady said, just let me be your client. And she mentioned something about dental work, and this thing happened in my brain, and stuff just started adding up really fast. Two things she mentioned that can be traumatizing and eventually cause fatigue, chronic pain, and death, which is what I had experienced my whole life, were, oddly enough, root canals that are not done properly, where eventually viruses eat up your bones and your face. And the other thing was she didn't even mention this. The doctor that I went to about this said, and you had braces, didn't you? Your mouth is pushed so far back. Do you have trouble breathing? And I had terrible apnea. Couldn't even get out of bed for an hour every morning because I had to deep breathe for an hour to just put my feet on the floor.
Wow.
But I couldn't stand machines. So I was just like, I'd rather die than be hooked up to machines. So I went to this dentist, but it was right after I had a very powerful experience in a Kundalini setting with a teacher where I had definitely experienced Sartori. And on the flight back to my house, I found myself choosing between going to the mountain and just sitting in Sartori the rest of my life, or going back to the earth, to the society. And my heart for Jesus prayed to Jesus, and I felt called to like give love in a particular way and not worry about the suffering. Decided to stay here, even though at that point my husband was already out of the picture. Nobody needed me. My kids were grown, but I just felt like, hey, I still have some love I can give. I went to a dentist and found out that she could cure the apnea, the chronic migraines I'd had all my life, the chronic pain, and the fatigue through reversing the damage done by the braces and taking these infected teeth out and allowing my bones to heal again, because I'd also had face pain my whole life and I didn't know what it was. Wow. And this is something the doctors, of course, could not find. So I had a pivotal prayer with God where I was like, let's get serious, God. I said, this is not what I want to do. And I would much rather die. Hands down. I mean, I don't have to even sit on mountains. Just give me death rather than go through this. Wow. But I felt a call to stay on the planet, and I didn't know why, out of love, and to just go through the suffering. And it has been suffering.
Yeah.
It's supposed to take 2 years. I'm in my 4th year because my body got so weak it couldn't change anymore. It was like my orthodontist, she's an angel, would say, I'm sorry, I can't make your body change. And I'd be like, what do I do? Go to more healers, take more vitamins. You know, I was just exhausted. And I met a man, fell in love with me, married me. I mean, it's just been an amazing miracle. But I'm near the end of it now. I just had my last wire. I just probably for the last time ate blended food. And and my husband is very excited about my braces eventually coming off, and they'll give me new teeth. My bones have healed. I can take implants miraculously enough. And I will finish my research and get a PhD. And
it's incredible. I hope you don't mind me saying, Marie, because we met in person about 18 months ago. And I was saying when we got on the call, it's like your face has completely changed. It's like, yeah, you're kind of, I don't know, you're grown into who you are, who you actually are. It's like I can see you. It's really, there's been a huge shift. And you said it's like you're kind of coming into who
body.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Right. I can breathe, and my head is getting connected to my body. So it comes back to one more thing, which is when I had these amazing spiritual experiences of just total peace and nirvana, I don't think I was totally in my body. I mean, I've been working with my body for years, doing yoga and the right eating and the qigong and doing everything anyone could do, but there was a place where I just couldn't be there. And so I think what happened is when I made that commitment spiritually to go ahead and be here on the planet, it was like, okay, it was almost like I could hear God going, okay, if you're willing, then I'm going to give you a new throat and jaw and neck so that you can do something different, something more with what you've got.
Wow.
So I feel like this was people could say, when I told one Kundalini teacher, she goes, oh, that's the way Kundalini would work. She'd just send you to a dentist and have this throat chakra get opened. However you want to look at it. I don't think it's disconnected from the spiritual path.
Yeah. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, Marie. I can so relate, and I'm sure a lot of people watching will relate to the bodily changes that happen as well. It's incredible. I remember the moment I looked down and thought, oh, they're my hands, I'm in my body for the first time ever. And it's like you don't realise you're disconnected from body until you actually have the experience of being in body. It's incredible, isn't it?
Isn't that true? It's like, you know, when someone say, well, I don't know how much I'm in my body, I'd be like, well, there's no way to know, because the grace of it is that when we're disconnected, we're numb to it. It's just, it's grace. It's like divine mercy.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And you're talking about your throat chakra being opened now, and you're sharing more than ever, which is lovely. And so you're in the process of developing your sharing of all of your years of learning into a new program, a new education program, 12-step. So Spiritual Emergence Anonymous, 12-step program for integrating spiritually transformative experiences, which is so needed. Do you mind just explaining a bit about what you're planning to do?
What I'm doing? Well, I don't think I call it an educational program. It's really basically a 12-step program. I think the world knows by now that that's a spiritual program.
Yeah.
And we're not, I've been working on it for a year. It's when two or more are gathered, you have a group. And so I and a colleague of mine, Katrina Mitchell, have been gathering together, going through the 12-step program for a year from the perspective of assisting us to integrate our spiritual emergence and or emergency, both, you know, it works both ways. So it's been a beautiful experience, because I said, well, I'm going to try it out first to make sure it works. And I truly believe that it does. It's been a marvelous year. It's been probably as transformative as any year in my life, but much more gently.
Wow.
Than all the other transformations, which have been pretty rough and hard and a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
This one has been profound and gentle. And so that's what my heart is drawn to, is being able to help other people maybe go through the same kinds of, or whatever their spiritual experiences, maybe more gently. So we are, we have adapted the 12 steps and the 12 traditions for a spiritual emergence. We've applied to the General Service Board of AA to get sanction from them.
Wonderful.
And we are right now organizing a pilot program where we'll co-author a manual, which is how it was done in AA and how it was done in Al-Anon. It's a beautiful process. Because what happened is, even though I've been a therapist and a spiritual director for many years, and right now I do mostly spiritual direction, I knew, because I've been there, that when I was truly in the throes of spiritual emergency, I had no money. Yeah. In fact, I read Stan Grof's book way back then. It was like the year it was published. And Sen had just started, and I remember calling Sen, this was back in the 70s, saying, I need a therapist. And then when I got a therapist and they told me how much they charged, I was like, well, that's out of the question. Can't do it. So I just did it alone. Yeah. So I am so pleased, and it's close to my heart to offer a program that speaks specifically to spiritual emergency and spiritual emergence, that is affordable and it works.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I love the vision of kind of rolling this out like the AA, you know, as it is in the world. It's here, coming together, supporting each other. It's, beautiful vision and so needed. I mean, you know, at ISEN, we know there's so many people who contact the networks in need of this support, Marie. So what you're doing is really, really essential. So I'm excited to see where that goes. Oh, we've lost you. I think we lost.
No, I'm here. I just was quiet.
Oh, I thought we'd lost.
I wasn't frozen.
Thought we'd lost.
No, I was not frozen. I'm just quiet.
Oh, so how are you hoping that will roll out? Do you have a Do you have a plan for rolling it out? I know you're recruiting for writing the manual right now.
Right. We're collecting our first group around us, and mainly I'm doing what I've been doing the whole year, which is I'm trusting to be guided for how it will roll out in divine timing and in the divine way. I don't know what that'll be. What I'm looking forward to is that I feel like I've been holding it very close, mostly alone. Katrina is a wonderful person to work with, but mostly relying on how God's speaking to me. And so what's going to happen naturally, which is how the 12-step program works, is it will become a group creation of everyone in the group. A group conscience is then what creates it. So although I have no idea how and the timing of that and what form it will take, it will be a new wonderful experience to be part of that group in that unfolding.
Beautiful. And that kind of fits with everything you've been saying, doesn't it, about letting the ego get out of the way and just letting things unfold naturally and waiting and not kind of forcing anything. That's kind of how we try and work in ISEN, is really listen to what the universe is asking for and not try and guide it by what we think is needed, but listen and wait, and it all happens in the right timing, and things come along then when it's kind of effortless. It's effortless when it's in divine timing, isn't it? So,
and effortless and joyful.
Yes, absolutely.
Joyful. I mean, that's something I so respect with ISEN, in my in watching and being part of it, is that same effortless and joyful way. I mean, we're talking suffering. This is a serious matter, but the experiencing that movement as it unfolds is such a joy. And I will say, someone asked me the question, they said, oh, so your PhD is going to help you do this 12-step program, or they're combined. And I was really happy to be able to say, no, actually, the beauty of it is they're completely different. I will be a doctorate. I will publish a book with my research. I will offer this, academic, evidence-based body of knowledge to help. But the beautiful thing is, on the other hand, the 12-step program, by its very definition, is completely nonprofit, anonymous, egoless oriented. And that I relish in that. It's an honor to be part of that, and it will have nothing to do with my identity, as a researcher. Or a spiritual director,
That's what I love to hear, Marie. And I think to me, that when I hear somebody say that, I have such enormous respect for you, because that's pure integration. I think I feel that if you can be your true, authentic self, and share yourself and your journey and what you're doing, and but also have that professional standing, but be so open about your own personal journey and have that integrated into what you're delivering. That's just beautiful. That's what unites us all, isn't it, as human?
You're such a great interviewer. Anyone who can make anyone feel as good as you make people feel. You're in the right place doing the right job.
It's true.
Katie, thank you so much.
I mean it though, Marie. I really mean it. And I said this to Laurie, people like you who are doing, who are professionals, who have that standing, but are willing to be here and share. That's what warms my heart. And I mean that authentically. It's nothing to do with being a good interviewer. I'm speaking from the heart. So
well, thank you. Of course I know you are. I guess I just I don't want to blush online or anything.
Oh. Well, that would be the ego, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely, and that's kind of what the campaign is all about, and why I'm so appreciative of people like you stepping up and sharing. You're I know a year ago you were very conscious about the braces and people seeing and being on camera, so to see that you're sharing about it so openly now is lovely. It's really that's kind of it. It shows your 12-step programs worked.
Maybe that's why God made it take 4 years instead of 2, because after 2 years I still wouldn't have done this.
All in divine timing. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Marie, for being here and sharing. And I'm really excited to kind of keep talking to you about this and see where it goes, and hopefully, collaborate in some way as well. So yes, the series, it is fun. It's like you said, it's amazing how we can talk so, and have joy in doing this work when it's such a serious subject. But I suppose that's the whole point, isn't it? The duality is like the paradoxes of life. We can see both sides. So hope to kind of work with you some more and share more joy. Good luck for everything you're doing. And,
thank you. And thank you so much for what you're doing, Katie. I mean, just the Emerging Proud and the ISEN is definitely become a uplifting part of my life.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Marie. Well, it's, meeting people like you that's given me the confidence along the way to keep going too. So, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.